Tonight, before sleep finds you, let us step away from the noise of the living world. Let the day loosen its grip. Let thoughts slow, one by one, like footsteps, fading down. But now as her role have ended. His feet at the D loosen its grip. Let thoughts slow, one by one, like footsteps fading down. Along like footsteps fading down. And along quiet roads have ended. It is a story about Hades. Most people know his name only through fear. They whisper it or avoid it entirely. They imagine darkness, fire, punishment, and a ruler with a cruel heart and empty eyes. But fear often grows where understanding is absent, and the quietest gods are usually the most misunderstood. Hades was never the god of chaos. He did not seek worship nor praise nor songs sung in his honor. He ruled no sky, commanded no storms, and inspired no sudden miracles. Instead, he ruled endings, and endings, as humans know well, are never loud. They arrive softly, like dusk, like the last breath of a long day, like sleep, long before mortals told stories about death. With trembling voices, The universe itself needed balance. Life surged forward, endlessly, unchecked, until even the gods understood that creation without rest becomes cruelty. So the realms were divided. The sky rose high and wide. The sea stretched vast and restless, and beneath it all, a place of what cruelty. So the realms. In the beginning, before the realms were named and divided, the universe was young and unsettled. There was motion everywhere. Light surged, matter shifted, and creation pushed outward with no sense of restraint. The gods were born into this movement, shaped by forces older than thought itself, and even they did not yet understand what they would become. Hades was not born in darkness. He was born, like his brothers, into a world still forming its own balance. Kronos ruled then, not as a king with wisdom, but as a force driven by fear. He feared endings, feared replacement, feared the moment when his power would no longer be his alone. And so, in his terror of losing control, he swallowed his own children, believing that by consuming the future, he could remain eternal. Hades was among them. Inside Kronos, time did not pass in any way mortals would recognize. There was no sky, no ground, no rising or falling of days. Only a vast, suspended stillness, broken occasionally by the distant presence of other imprisoned gods, his brothers and sisters, bound together not by love, but by circumstance. It was there, in that suspended existence, that Hades first learned patience. Zeus raged. Even then, his spirit pressed outward, restless, seeking the sound of thunder that had not yet been born. Poseidon churned with silent anger, like tides without a shore. But Hades did not struggle in the same way. He listened, he waited, he learned the shape of silence. When release finally came, violent, sudden, and unforgettable, it did not feel like triumph. Zeus rose in rebellion, forcing Kronos to release what he had consumed. The universe shook as the old order cracked, and the Titan fell. The gods were free, but freedom arrived carrying the weight of war. The Titanomachy followed, a conflict so vast that even the earth seemed unsure whether it would survive it. Mountains split, seas boiled, and the sky itself seemed to tremble under the clash of immortals. Each god found their nature sharpened by conflict. Zeus discovered command, Poseidon discovered fury, and Hades discovered something quieter. He discovered that not every battle is fought to be won. While others surged forward, Hades often remained behind the lines, watching what remained after devastation passed. He saw landscapes emptied of sound. He saw echoes where armies had stood. He saw that after every great force exerted itself, something was always left behind, broken, abandoned, unresolved, and someone had to remain with those remnants. When the war ended and the Titans fell, victory did not feel complete. The universe was stable again, yes, but stability required structure, and structure demanded division. The cosmos needed order. So the brothers gathered. No songs were sung that day. No mortal eyes watched from below. The world held its breath as the gods drew lots for the realms they would rule. Zeus, with his commanding presence and unyielding will, took the sky. The heavens answered him willingly, filled with light, storms, and endless visibility. Poseidon claimed the seas, vast and unpredictable, echoing his own restless spirit. And Hades received what was left. The realm beneath. Not a punishment, though many would later say it was. Not exile, though it would feel that way in time. It was simply necessary. Someone had to rule what came after. Hades did not argue. He did not demand more. He did not seek exchange. He understood, perhaps before the others, that every structure needs a foundation hidden from view, a place unseen, bearing weight without applause. The underworld was not yet the place mortals would fear. It was raw, undefined, closer to an idea than a destination. Rivers had not yet learned their courses. Shadows had not learned their shapes. Souls had not yet arrived in numbers enough to give the realm its quiet gravity. Hades descended into it alone. There were no cheering crowds, no welcoming halls, only space, waiting to be shaped. In the early ages, Hades walked the boundaries of his realm, learning its silence. He did not impose cruelty upon it. He did not decorate it with terror. Instead, he listened, as he always had. He felt where the stillness gathered naturally, where echoes softened, where time itself seemed to slow. He built not with fire, but with restraint. Stone rose where it was needed. Paths formed where souls would one day walk without knowing why. The rivers, Styx, Lethe, Acheron, were not created as traps, but as transitions. Each served a purpose: separation, forgetting, release. Hades understood something the others did not yet face. Mortals would come, not as invaders, not as enemies, but as inevitabilities. Life above would flourish, struggle, love, and break. And when it ended, those lives would need somewhere to go that was neither chaos nor judgment alone. They would need order, calm, and a ruler who did not hunger for their fear. So Hades prepared. He fashioned laws not to punish, but to prevent disorder. He established boundaries, not walls. The underworld was not meant to consume the living world, nor to threaten it. It was meant to support it quietly, from beneath. And in doing so, Hades began to change. While Zeus stood beneath open skies and felt the gaze of worshippers rise toward him, Hades felt the opposite pull. He felt the weight of everything descending: souls, memories, regrets, unfinished thoughts. He became heavier, slower, more deliberate. Immortality does not shield a god from solitude. As centuries passed, Hades rarely left his realm, not because he was forbidden, but because absence there would cause imbalance. The underworld needed continuity. It needed a presence that did not waver, a ruler who did not disappear when attention faded. So he stayed. From time to time, gods passed through. Hermes, swift and bright, guiding souls with gentle efficiency. Rare visitors who found the realm colder than they expected, not in temperature, but in emotional distance. There were no celebrations in the underworld, no feasts echoing with laughter, but there was peace of a different kind. The peace of things settled, the peace of a final exhale. Hades did not envy his brothers, though mortals would later insist he must have. He did not crave thunder or tides. He watched from afar as Olympus glittered with drama and desire, and he remained unmoved. Because someone had to be. Someone had to remain unchanged while everything else transformed. As the first mortals began to die, they arrived confused, frightened, clinging to their last moments of breath. Hades did not meet them with cruelty. He did not mock their fear. He simply allowed them to arrive. And in that allowance, he became something no one had planned for him to be. A guardian of endings. A keeper of rest. A god who did not demand belief, only acceptance. The world above continued to misunderstand him. They would tell stories, exaggerate shadows, paint him as a tyrant seated upon a throne of bones. But those stories were told by the living, who feared what they could not return from. Hades did not correct them. He had learned long ago that silence, though often mistaken for darkness, is sometimes the greatest form of mercy. And so his life settled into a rhythm few would ever notice. Souls arrived, souls rested, the rivers flowed, the realm remained. Above, seasons turned, empires rose and fell, names were forgotten. Below, Hades remained. And it was only when the balance of the world itself shifted when life and death brushed too closely against one another, that his solitude would change, and a presence unlike any other would enter his quiet realm. But that would come later. For now, the underworld breathed slowly, steadily, and Hades stood at its center, patient as ever, holding together the part of existence everyone else preferred not to see. Time in the underworld did not move forward the way it did above. There were no mornings to begin, no evenings to conclude. No sun traced its arc across the sky, reminding anyone that a day had been spent. Instead, time pooled and drifted, like still water that barely rippled when something passed through it. Hades grew accustomed to this. He became aware of change only through arrivals. Each soul entered differently. Some came quietly, already exhausted by life. Others resisted, clinging to names, to faces, to unfinished sentences they would never speak aloud again. Hades did not rush them. He allowed their fear to settle on its own, knowing that fear loses its sharpness when it is not fed. This was not mercy as the living understood it. It was inevitability, made gentle through patience. The rules of the underworld formed slowly, not from decrees shouted from a throne, but from observation. Hades watched how souls behaved, how memory weighed them down, how regret lingered longer than pain. He learned that punishment alone did not create order, only understanding did. Thus came judgment, not as a spectacle, but as a process. Not every soul was the same. Some carried violence, like a second skin. Others arrived fragile, hollowed out by grief. The underworld responded accordingly. Places formed where souls could confront what they had been, and others where forgetting was allowed. Lethe flowed softly for those who could no longer carry themselves. Asphodel stretched endlessly for those who lived without great harm or great courage. Tartarus remained distant, heavy, untouched by most. Hades did not delight in any of it. If anything, he took pride only in the balance, the quiet certainty that nothing entered or left his realm without purpose, that life above could continue, knowing that its endings were held securely below. It was during these early ages that mortals began to pray. They did not pray to Hades often. When they did, it was rarely with hope. They asked for mercy for the dead, for delay, for exceptions. Some asked for power over death itself, as if death were a thing to be bargained with. Hades listened, as he always had. And as he always would, he refused most of what was asked. Not from cruelty, but from necessity. To grant too much mercy would unravel the structure of the world. To allow exceptions freely would turn endings into chaos. Hades understood something that even gods struggled to accept. Compassion without limits becomes destruction. So he remained firm. And in his firmness, his solitude deepened. Olympus above was never quiet. It shimmered with ambition, jealousy, love, betrayal. Gods argued, interfered, fell in and out of favor with mortals. Their lives intertwined endlessly with the world of breath and blood. Hades stood apart from all of it. He was invited rarely and attended even less. When he did ascend to Olympus, the air felt thin to him, loud, conversations rushed, time pressed forward insistently, demanding action, decision, spectacle. He always returned below. The underworld did not demand performance. It did not expect charm. It only required presence. It was there, in that unchanging stillness, that Persephone entered his story. She did not arrive as a scream. The world above would later tell it that way. A maiden taken, a mother weeping, a god stealing what did not belong to him. Those stories served the fears of the living well enough. But reality, as it so often is, was quieter. Persephone was not meant for the underworld, and yet she was not entirely meant for the surface either. She moved through fields of growth and color with a gentleness that did not fully belong to endless spring. There was curiosity in her, a gravity that pulled her gaze downward even as flowers bloomed beneath her feet. When the earth opened, it did not roar. It sighed, and when Persephone crossed into the realm below, she did not do so as a prisoner dragged in chains. She arrived in confusion, yes, but also in wonder. The underworld, in its stillness, was unlike anything she had known. Hades did not greet her as a conqueror. He did not know how. He had spent ages ruling souls who did not belong to him, in the way the living belong to one another. Persephone was alive, vibrant, carrying the warmth of seasons within her. Her presence changed the air of the realm in subtle ways. Shadows softened, silence shifted. Hades did not take her voice. He listened to it. Their bond formed not through force, but through contrast. Persephone saw what few others ever had, the order beneath fear, the care woven into the structure of endings. Hades in turn saw something he had not allowed himself to imagine, continuity that did not erase stillness. Yet the world above did not accept this change. Demeter's grief tore through the land. Crops withered, seasons faltered, mortals starved, not because death ruled them, but because life refused to move forward. Balance once again was threatened. Hades did not argue his case loudly. He never had. When the gods demanded Persephone's return, he listened. He weighed the consequences, as he always did, and he agreed, not because he lost, but because balance required it. The compromise that followed shaped the world forever. Persephone would walk between realms, part of the year above, part below. Life and death bound together not by dominance, but by rhythm. Spring would return, winter would come, and nothing would remain static. The underworld changed after that. It was still quiet, still solemn, but it was no longer untouched by renewal. Persephone's presence brought growth where none had existed. Not flowers, but understanding. She became a bridge, a reminder that endings and beginnings are never as separate as mortals wish them to be. For Hades, something else shifted as well. He was no longer entirely alone. He did not become gentler, nor more severe. He remained what he had always been. But in Persephone's absence and return, he learned the shape of waiting in a new way. Not the waiting of patience, the waiting of attachment. And though the world above would continue to paint him as a thief, a villain, a god to be feared, the underworld itself told a different story. It told of a ruler who understood restraint, of a god who did not confuse possession with love, of an immortal who accepted that even endings must sometimes be shared. As centuries passed, heroes would descend into his realm, seeking glory, escape, or impossible bargains. Hades would receive them all the same way, without awe, without hatred. He did not fear defiance. He did not reward arrogance. He simply remained, because in a universe forever leaning toward motion, someone had to stand still. And Hades, ruler of what comes after, continued to hold that stillness, not as a curse, but as a promise kept quietly, beneath everything else. Stories, once they reach the surface, rarely remain unchanged. They are shaped by fear, by longing, by the need to make sense of what cannot be returned from. And so, as generations passed, mortals began to tell stories about Hades that said more about themselves than about the god they described. They imagined him cruel, because death felt cruel. They imagined him cold, because endings felt cold. They imagined him watching with delight, because they could not accept a world where suffering was not personal. Hades heard none of these stories directly. Prayers, yes. Whispers of desperation, pleas spoken into the dark. But the myths themselves drifted down slowly, altered, distorted, softened or sharpened by each telling. And he let them remain that way. The underworld did not require reputation. It required function. Souls continued to arrive, as they always had. Some were kings, carrying the echo of authority long after their bodies had failed. Others were children, confused by the sudden absence of warmth. Warriors arrived stained with memory. Lovers arrived still reaching for hands that no longer existed. Hades treated them all the same. Titles meant nothing once breath had ended. Wealth did not weigh more than regret. Glory faded faster than guilt. In the underworld, there was only what had been carried inward, and even that eventually softened. Judgment, when it occurred, was never theatrical. There were no gavel strikes. No crowds waiting to see who would fall or rise. The process was quiet, internal, shaped as much by the soul itself as by any law Hades upheld. Souls confronted what they had been, not as punishment, but as recognition. For some, this was unbearable. For others, it was release. Hades did not interfere beyond what was necessary. He did not guide souls toward redemption or damnation. He ensured that the structure held, that no soul wandered endlessly without direction, that the flow remained steady. Occasionally, a soul refused to accept its ending. These were the ones that lingered, clung, reached backward into the living world. They whispered into dreams, pressed against memory, refused to let go of what had already let go of them. Hades allowed this resistance for a time. Grief, after all, does not disappear when ignored. But he did not allow it to persist forever. Souls that refused rest were guided gently toward forgetting, not as erasure, but as easing. Lethe's waters waited patiently, as they always had. Above, mortals told stories of ghosts and hauntings, unaware that most such echoes faded not through fear, but through acceptance. Heroes too began to descend. They came seeking fame, proof, or the reversal of death itself. Orpheus entered with music trembling on his breath, his love louder than his understanding of balance. Heracles arrived bearing strength that did not belong in a realm that valued restraint. Odysseus passed through cautiously, aware that cleverness alone could not command silence. Hades received them all with the same expression. He did not challenge them unless they threatened order. He did not admire them unless they demonstrated humility. Their bravery mattered little once they stood where death was not an enemy, but a certainty. When bargains were struck, they were precise. Hades never lied. He never cheated. He never bent words to trap those who listened poorly. If a soul was lost because of him, it was not because he deceived, but because the living failed to understand that conditions exist for reasons beyond desire. Orpheus turned, not because Hades was cruel, but because hope, when rushed, becomes fragile. These moments did not define Hades, though mortals insisted they did. They became stories told to children, warnings disguised as entertainment. But beneath the myth, the pattern remained unchanged. The underworld endured, and so did its ruler. As ages turned, the world above shifted. Cities rose, languages changed, names evolved. Gods themselves became quieter in the lives of mortals. Belief transformed, fractured, redirected. Hades felt this change, not as loss, but as thinning. Fewer prayers reached him. Fewer sacrifices were offered. Fewer stories spoke his name aloud. But souls continued to arrive, regardless of belief. Death, after all, does not depend on worship. This understanding freed Hades from something his brothers struggled with. Zeus above felt his relevance challenged as mortals turned toward new structures of meaning. Poseidon's seas were charted, crossed, mapped. Their domains were observed, measured, questioned. Hades' realm remained untouched by progress. No one sought to conquer it. No one tried to explain it away. No philosophy could reduce it to numbers. It simply was. And so Hades remained steady, while the world reinvented itself endlessly. Persephone, moving between realms, felt this contrast most sharply. Above, she was a symbol of spring, of rebirth, of hope. Below, she was presence. She spoke to souls, listened to their stories, softened their fear with understanding born of duality. Together they ruled not as king and queen in the way mortals imagined, but as complementary forces. Hades maintained structure. Persephone introduced empathy. Neither overpowered the other. When she departed each year, the underworld returned to its deeper stillness. Hades resumed his solitary watch, unchanged, unresentful. When she returned, the realm shifted again, not in celebration, but in quiet recognition. This rhythm became a language of its own. And then, gradually, something unfamiliar crept into Hades' awareness. Imbalance. Not from within the underworld, but from above. Mortals began to seek ways around death, not through myth or prayer, but through denial. They built monuments to permanence. They chased legacy as if it could anchor them indefinitely. They feared endings more than ever, even as they lived longer, louder lives. Hades observed this without judgment. But he sensed strain. Souls arrived more fragmented, clinging harder to identity, less willing to release. Memory weighed heavier. Forgetting felt more like loss than relief. The structure held, for now, but the tension between life and death was tightening. And Hades, who had spent eternity maintaining balance, understood what few others did. When endings are denied too fiercely, they do not disappear. They return in forms far more difficult to contain. The underworld remained calm, but beneath its still surface, change waited. And Hades, eternal watcher of what follows, stood ready, not to act dramatically, but to endure whatever adjustment the universe would inevitably demand. Because some gods rule through action, and some rule through patience, tested beyond measure. Change did not announce itself in the underworld with thunder or fire. It never did. It arrived as pressure, a subtle strain in the flow of souls, a quiet resistance that Hades felt long before it became visible. The rivers still moved, the halls still echoed softly, but something in the rhythm had shifted. Endings were no longer settling as easily as they once had. Souls arrived heavier. They carried more with them than before. More memory, more identity, more insistence on being remembered exactly as they were. They spoke less of what they had done and more of what they feared losing. Names mattered to them in a way they never had. Faces, roles. And now, as this story comes to rest, there is nothing more you need to follow. Hades' world remains quiet, steady, and whole, and you may leave it here, knowing it will continue without effort from you. If your thoughts are still drifting, let them slow even further. There is no need to carry the weight of endings tonight. They belong to the universe, not to you. Allow your breathing to deepen. Allow your body to soften into stillness. Whatever the day asked of you has already been given. Thank you for spending this time with Slivor, and for allowing this quiet story to accompany you into the night. If these gentle journeys bring you comfort, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe, so more stories can find you whenever you need rest. For now, simply let go. Sleep peacefully, sleep deeply, and may the quiet carry you all the way into morning.